Hi everyone and welcome. My name is Esther and I am the Outreach Coordinator for the Southampton Uni Christian Union. And today's lunchtime talk is looking at finding hope and fighting despair with Kate Middleton, who's joined us today. Kate is going to be speaking on mental health, the Christian faith and student life. And afterwards, we're going to be having a short Q&A section with her. So we'll encourage you to send your questions in throughout. So Kate, could you please introduce yourself and explain who you are and what you do?
Yeah, hi everyone. It's so good to be with you. I'm sorry I can't be physically in Southampton because I love the seaside, but I am stuck in Hertfordshire right now in my own little study where I've spent most of the last 8 months. I'm a psychologist. I'm one of the directors of an organisation called the Mind and Soul Foundation. So if you want to check that out, it's mindandsoulfoundation.org. And I'm also a church leader in Hertfordshire. And I guess I'm super passionate about like how we do life well. How do you get the best out of your mind? So emotional health and well-being, but not just when you're ill, but like how do you really flourish and thrive? And particularly one of my interests in like pre-COVID normal life days, if you can even remember what they were, was particularly in more pressured times, in more challenging times. How do you do that well? So when we then went into this totally loopy season of pandemic life, that became a really interesting challenge. And so it's something that I've been speaking and teaching lots on, like practical suggestions. How do we get through this with our sanity mostly intact? But even more, can we not just survive? Is it possible to thrive in these really unusual times?
Oh, thank you. And could you just explain, you mentioned the Mind and Soul Foundation. Could you explain more of what that is? Give us a brief summary.
Yeah, sure. So there's 4 of us who are the directors of that. So we are me, a psychologist, we have 2 psychiatrists and we have a vicar, which sounds like the beginning of a joke, doesn't it? But actually isn't. It's just that's how we run the organisation. And we are 4 people who are passionate about the role the church can play in getting involved in these issues of mental and emotional well-being. So illness, but also, like I've said, wellness. And because churches, they're like in the centre of their communities and they interact and support so many people, schools and different projects. It's an amazing space to start to send out really good information, really good resources, really good practical teaching, just to help everybody else do life better. And so that's what we're about. We want people to have like the best possible experience of life that they can.
Cool, amazing. So before Kate starts, if you want to be sending in your questions for the Q&A section afterwards, you can do this at slido.com and you put in a little event code, and our event code is 19540. So please be doing that, and then Kate will answer your questions at the end. So yeah, Kate, I will pass over to you now. Thank you.
Brilliant. So what I want to talk to you about this morning is what feels like the biggest challenge of this specific stage of the season. Because I don't know about you, but way back in March, I didn't see this coming at all. It was like a total shock. And when it did start, most people treated it like a sort of short-term, acute, crazy moment in time. It was very much like head down, don't think about it, la, 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 just keep going. But now, like 8 months in, and particularly in the last month or so, as we've been going into the winter, we've hit another lockdown in England. We've started to recognise this is going to go through to the other side into next year, maybe even up to the spring. Who knows? Depends who you believe right now, how long this might last. But what we started to struggle with more and more is the question of how do you do life in what isn't just a crazy short-term crisis, but has become that awful phrase, this new normal that I don't know what it is, but it definitely ain't normal. So how do you do it? How do you survive? How do you feel good? How do you experience fun? How do you hold that and sustain yourself through a season? How do you fight, in particular, despair? And how do you find hope? And that really is the biggest challenge of where we're at now. Because even with news of a new vaccine and we start to see the possibility of some hope on the horizon, the balance between those two things, and it's like the battle between them, we can see them played out all the time. You know, someone raises a hope-filled story on the news, but really quickly the despair starts to bubble up. People are like, oh yeah, but it's going to take ages to roll the vaccine out, and loads of people aren't going to want it, and what if there's side effects? And you can see the fight between these two things. And in your mind, as a psychologist, I know the sort of battle between hope and despair is a really, really key one. And it's really interesting how that plays into a season like this that isn't just short term, but is long term. You know, there's a little quote that's some ancient wisdom. It's actually from the New Testament, and it's a letter written by a guy called Paul, and he was writing to the earliest Christians. And it's just a little phrase of what he says that I want to share with you. He says this, he says, suffering helps us to endure, and endurance builds character, which gives us hope that will never disappoint us. And that is such an interesting little statement about this season. Suffering helps us to endure, endurance builds character, and character gives us hope. And I want to really think alongside that about some of the psychological wisdom and expertise that we have about how your mind works. And first of all, it really explains and helps us to understand why despair is such an issue. Did you know you actually have a center in your brain which triggers that awful feeling of despair? It's probably the worst feeling in the world, that sort of overwhelming, suffocating sense of just like, oh, I just need to give up. I can't do this anymore. I just want to lie down on the floor and hope it all goes away. It's just too much. I can't cope. I can't do this. It's a feeling of feeling overwhelmed. It's a feeling of like what you're facing exceeds your capacity to deal with it. It just all feels too much. And that center in your brain is triggered quite specifically by moments when you feel out of control. It's when something about what you're facing feels like you can't influence it, you can't change it, you can't bring a better situation, you can't change the story. And this season is so much about a situation that is out of your control, probably uniquely so. And actually what's interesting is what that's done is it's raised all of our stress levels, because control, but also rhythm and routine, they're things that your mind uses to keep your overall stress level low. You know, stress isn't just distress. Stress is anything that requires your body or your brain to react, to adapt, to change to stuff that's going on around you. And it's a complicated physiological system. And I guess you can think of your stress level on that system as a bit like the water level in a pool. And when the water level's low, like you can't see my feet, but they're down there. But imagine the water level is down at your ankles. The challenges of life and even emotions like frustration and anxiety, which operate on the same system, they're like waves in that pool. And if the baseline's low, they're no problem. But we all have this crisis point on that system. And it's where genuinely your capacity of how much you can juggle and manage and deal with at one time, when that starts to get close to its limit, and literally that's like the water levels at your neck, you're at risk of going under. And that point of overwhelm where you're just starting to feel like I am on the edge of losing it, of freaking out, it's genuinely because your brain is like, seriously, this is becoming an emergency. You're about to get to the point where you're not going to cope with all of this. You can't keep track of everything. You can't manage all the demands that are being thrown at you. You start to feel at risk of going under. And when you're in that place on the edge of overwhelm, your brain goes onto this kind of emergency setting. It tries to limit the demands that are being placed on it. And it changes literally the way that you think. Your mind starts to see the world in a different way. It tries to simplify everything and make the world around you like it's very black and white. Everything is either one thing or another thing. It's either black or white. So it's either good or it's bad. You've either succeeded at something or you've totally failed. Someone is either for you or they're against you. Your mind starts to treat everything that it's like that. The trouble is most of life is actually lived in the grey in between those two things. And because your brain is on emergency mode, it's what we call hypervigilant. You're much more negative of any of those options, those black and white options. So you're already on the point of overwhelm, but it starts to feel like the whole world is against you, starts to feel like everybody is out to get you. You are failing at everything. Everything is bad and doom laden. It's not a great space to be in. And because your stress level is right up at that overwhelm point, you become hypersensitive emotionally. So little things you would normally cope with, suddenly those little waves push you literally out of your depth. So what you're thinking, what the heck's wrong with me? Not only has the world gone mad and is totally black and doom laden, but I have become this totally crazy person who is losing it over the slightest thing. The littlest challenge, a little essay that I've got to get done, or an email from my supervisor, or just trying to figure out the answer to a question that normally I would have been able to do easily. These things are pushing me into a space where I feel overwhelmed, I feel panicked, I feel like I can't do it. And in a world where actually we've got loads to deal with all the time, loads of change, loads of uncertainty, loads of new challenge, that's really hard. And then the third way that your mind changes when it's in that emergency space is it starts to really struggle to focus attention, because your mind is trying to keep an eye on everything, like watch everything, because anything could change at any moment. So you can't focus. You're trying to study and your flipping mind just won't get down to it. You can't get what psychologists call flow, which is where you're really in the zone, and it's really satisfying because you're getting stuff done. And you can't sleep because your mind is like, well, seriously, this is potentially an emergency moment. It's not a good time to switch off and go to sleep. So it changes everything about the way that we act. And at the same time, because we feel so out of control, your brain is triggering despair. And gosh, so the most important thing in this season is that we recognize that there are moments when we will feel like that. Probably things aren't as bad as they feel. A lot of those moments, actually what your mind is telling you is not necessarily true. We don't want to be fooled or freaked out in those moments. What we need to recognize actually is that what we need to do is drop our stress level, because we're in this overwhelm zone and our brains have stopped working. Literally your analytical, rational mind in those moments gets switched right down, because it's just, your brain's like, this is not the time to analyze. It's just like, do something, get out of here. Change your situation any way that you possibly can. So your mind starts to throw out ridiculous solutions to situations, or feel like there are no solutions, because your capacity to problem solve is just like plummeted. So you don't want to make big decisions when you're in that mode. You don't want to react to the way that the world feels in those acute moments. What you need to do is drop your stress level, take a moment, breathe, get away from anything that's challenging you, do something that helps you to relax. And so in this season, things that we can build into our life, building into our rhythm and routine to manage the situation we're under, but particularly in those moments where you can feel the panic or the frustration or the overwhelm rising and the despair rising, recognizing that sometimes in those moments, your brain's trying to deal with a long-term season as though it was a short-term acute challenge, and it's not going to help you. So just taking a moment, that can really, really help. But I want to get on to better news. So we talked about despair, but let's talk about hope, because there is a part of your brain that is actually a counterbalance to that despair center. And it is, some people call it the hope circuit. So that's kind of more fun, right? And this bit of your brain, not only does it lift your mood, it triggers good feelings, but it switches off, it actively balances and switches off that bit that can trigger despair. And this bit of your brain is actually much more under your control. It's something you can proactively trigger. And even better, you can grow your capacity to trigger and use the hope circuit in your brain. And that happens naturally. So if we look at how much that part of the brain is activated, kids and younger teens don't use it that much. Probably because actually when you're a kid or a younger teen, there isn't that much of your life that you can control. You don't have so much agency, as psychologists would say, because you're younger and your parents or significant grown-ups in your life or teachers or whoever, they're the people who mostly control and make decisions for you. But as you grow, as you go through adolescence, as you learn, I can have influence. I am a capable human being. Yes, you are. You can change stuff, and your ability to use that circuit starts to grow. But interestingly, like a lot of these things, most of us never use the full potential of it. And what's really interesting, it's back to that little bit of ancient wisdom I shared with you, is how difficult times can grow our capacity to use that circuit better. So what that little sentence that Paul wrote all those centuries ago talks about is when we are forced by circumstance, not just to experience something tough, but to endure under it, to persist with it. And the ancient Greek that he used when he wrote that sentence, it does talk about a circumstance that is longer term, when just because of the nature of life, we are in a season that is tough, that is difficult, that is challenging. That when we're in those moments, there is something interesting that can happen, something that isn't just about getting through those moments. It's about building something within us, which builds our capacity longer term, that maybe releases something within us that might change something for the future. So endurance, when we're in these seasons where we have to manage life that's tough, really does build character. It changes something potentially in your brain, and that can trigger what he talks about, which is hope. So in this season, if we can learn to harness the hope circuit, not only can we make stuff better for ourselves now, but maybe we can learn something in this season that might have a positive impact for the rest of our lives, that might even release a new potential from your mind. Because life is challenging, and a lot of the things that we've had to deal with in this season, particularly difficult emotions like frustration and anxiety, the more you do things in life that really matter to you, the more you're going to have to learn how to deal with some of those feelings. So anything in life that matters will trigger emotions like anxiety, because anxiety is your brain's way of grabbing your attention and saying, this matters, don't miss it, make sure you focus on it. Do you need to do something about this because it's important? So in this season, as we learn to manage the challenging emotions and the despair and the difficulty that we're under, can we learn something that's useful for the future? I'm trying really hard not to say this is character building, because I think if I say that, you'll all slightly want to hate me. And I even slightly want to hate myself, because this is the most maddening season. And I'm definitely not doing that really annoying thing of saying like, oh, but we have learned so many positive things through lockdown. No, lockdown sucks. And this is really difficult. But in this season, are there practical things that we can do that will help us get through now, but will also mean that we might come out of this even stronger and better carriers of hope? Because ultimately what our world needs, not just now but long term, is people who can carry the good stuff, the hope, the light, the life, the positive things, who can walk into difficult circumstances, who have got the ability to hold their nerve when everything around them has turned to chaos. And maybe that for you in your future leadership, in your future family role, in stuff that you're doing, in volunteering, anything like that, maybe that's going to be something that you can grow in this season. So what I want to talk to you we've got like 10 minutes or so left. So don't worry, I'm not going to bang on for too much longer, but I want to share with you 3 practical things you can do that trigger that hope circuit. Psychologists talk about a bunch of different things that trigger it, but I like to think of 3 P's. And these P's are all good things that we can think about for the rest of this season, particularly if there's acutely challenging times. So like if you're thrown into a couple of weeks of isolation, these are things you could focus on, but also longer term, because they're just great practical things to learn. So number 1, let's talk about positive emotions. Now, let me be clear. In the first lockdown, there was so much stuff everywhere about positivity. We must be positive. We must do the whole gratitude thing. We must clap for the carers and all of this stuff. Now, look, that stuff is great. It is really good to think positive, to focus on the positive, to recognize that there's still good stuff, even in a time that's really rough. But what I'm not talking about is that short-term kind of la, 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 let's not admit that there's anything negative. Maybe if we just push all the negative feelings down, they will magically disappear and then we won't need to deal with them. It doesn't work. The job of your negative emotions is to get your attention, because they're telling you that something significant, something important might be going on in the world around you. And if you try and just suppress them and push them down, that might work short term, but in the long term, they're going to get bigger. They're going to start bubbling up. You'll have moments when you're tired or vulnerable because you're on your own, or you've just had a really rubbish day, and that's when they'll hit you. It's difficult. And the risk, if we don't understand that, is that in those moments, we just feel even worse because we don't understand what's happening. We think, well, I'm doing really rubbish at this positivity, gratitude lark. Everybody else is managing to do that well. I am the most rubbish person in the world. And we take the stuff that we're already feeling and we add either guilt on it, because it's like, if I was a better person, I wouldn't be feeling like this, or fear, like, what is wrong with me? Why am I having a meltdown when everyone else in the world seems to be able to handle this so much better? So the weird thing is that sometimes the most important thing you need to do to free the positive feelings is actually allow yourself to feel the negative. Because if you're trying desperately to suppress a whole load of negative, rubbishy stuff, what you tend to do is switch off your whole emotional self. So you can't feel the good stuff either. And so many people are saying to me, I don't have fun anymore. I don't experience joy. I can't remember the last time I felt like happy, which is a really sucky way to be doing life. It might be okay for a few weeks or in that short-term crisis, but 7, 8, 9 months, and thinking of another 3 months of it, you're just like, oh my goodness, that's tough. So releasing yourself and saying, actually, sometimes being more positive is about admitting there are some difficult things in this season. So let's just talk about a few of them. Let's talk about loss. Loss is everywhere right now. Some of you might even have experienced the loss of bereavement if you've lost loved ones through COVID. You know, this is an awful, awful virus and people are dying. It's desperately sad. But also we've lost other stuff, haven't we? We've lost normal life. I don't know if there's freshers watching, you know, you've lost the experience of going off to uni. You lost the opportunity to do your A-levels. Whoever thought that would be a bad thing? But actually, it's surprisingly sucky. We have lost a lot of stuff, big transition moments in our life. We've lost like 8 months of not being able to hug people. That's really tough. There's a lot of loss in this season. And loss is an emotion that's trying to tell you there's stuff that you need to process. You need to think about, what does this mean? Not just in this moment, but to your understanding of the world, to how you do life, to things like the really important foundation stuff, your security, your vulnerability, big things for your mind. So it's a really powerful emotion, and it doesn't just go away. You need space to process those things. You need space on your own, like headspace, calm space, journaling space, thinking space, whatever that is. You need time and space just chatting it over with good mates, just bouncing stuff around, you know, when you're like, man, it's really weird. This season feels really weird and unusual. And then thirdly, sometimes you need professional space to do that, some actual proper support. If you've had something like a difficult bereavement in this season, you might need somewhere you can go really intentionally to be like, I need to somehow process this. So loss is a big deal. Anxiety is another big deal emotion because, like I said, it's your brain's way of grabbing your attention. It's like a smoke alarm. It tells you something significant might be going on, and so much is unusual right now. And anxiety particularly tells you about potential risks, something that might be bad that could happen. So in a world full of invisible risk, your anxiety alarm is going to be going off a lot. But just like your smoke alarm, most of the time it goes off, there actually isn't a huge crisis. Its job is to alert you, grab your attention and get you to check something out, and your analytical mind to figure out, do I actually need to do anything about this? And most of the time the answer is no. So what we need to learn in seasons like this is the emotional equivalent of the smoke alarm dance. You know the smoke alarm dance, right? That's this. You know, the wafting. I don't know if you guys have smoke alarms in your student account. That's like my smoke alarm in our house, but ours goes off like every time my son has a shower. So we have to like waft it, just get it back, default, reset, press the reset button, whatever it is. So we need to learn to deal with anxiety. How do you hold anxiety? How do you manage anxiety in a season where it is inevitable? Not be freaked out by it. And then frustration. Oh my goodness, so much of this season is frustrating. And when you're on the edge of overwhelm, you become really prickly. I don't know about you, but my tolerance level right now is like wet, like floor level. I cannot tolerate everything. Like, why would you load the dishwasher the wrong way in this season? Like, are you trying to push me over an edge? I am famed in our house for having broken our Alexa, because in a key moment in lockdown, I came out after a stressy morning and I said, Alexa, turn on the radio, and it said, wasn't connected to our Wi-Fi or something. So it just said, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble understanding you. And I just, in a moment, I just lost it. I picked it up and I slammed it on the surface and I broke it. Oops. Had to apologize to the rest of my family. But frustration is everywhere. And loads of people again saying to me, like, I don't feel like myself. I'm so crappy. Or they're saying, what is wrong with everyone else? Why is everybody driving me so crazy? Why is everyone out to get me? Remember, your brain makes everything really binary. Maybe, just maybe, everybody in your life is not out to get you right now. Maybe you're just in that overwhelm zone. So sometimes the reaction to some of these things is process-based. Sometimes it's about relaxation, dropping our stress levels. Sometimes it's about expressing those difficult emotions and not feeling guilty about them. But we do need to do that. And then alongside that, we do need to trigger the positive, the fun stuff. We need to do stuff that is about good life. You know, it's not just hedonistic, indulgent nonsense. It's really important. There's another even more ancient verse in the Old Testament that talks about how joy is your strength. And it's a Hebrew verse. And the Hebrew word used there for strength literally means it's your fortress. It's your place of protection. It's like a castle on a hill. It's where you retreat in the tough times. And your ability to know how do you cheer yourself up, that is probably one of the most significant skills that you'll have for the rest of your life. Because we treat life like it's binary too, like you're either happy or sad. But the reality is sometimes life is difficult and challenging. And some of those seasons will be some of the best times in your life. You move house, you come to uni. In the future, you guys, if you have babies, stuff like that, there will be seasons in life that are really hard work and really tough and challenging. Starting a new job, doing more exams, all of this sort of stuff. Your ability to know yourself well enough to think, this is what I do on a rubbish day that just makes me smart. I'm a big biker. I love to cycle. I cannot tell you how much I've cycled through this pandemic season. But I know no matter how rough a day I've had, if I get on my bike, if I bike to the top of the hill that's around the corner from my house and cycle down it really fast, I will smile. I will feel better. And sometimes, the birds, when you do that, they kind of like race alongside you. It's so cool. That will always make me smile. What always makes you smile? And how are you building it into your life right now? That's my number one, positive emotions. Number two is people. Now, people are also something that has been really challenged in this season. But as human beings, we are designed to need other people, to need connection with other people. It's so important. So we need to find ways to connect with other people in this time. And what's happened in pandemic, because that's become so hard, is something that they're calling friendship funneling. You took your original social space and you just narrowed it right down. And maybe you've managed to keep in touch with the 1, 2, 3 key people, but the rest is kind of gone. And what we lose is that peripheral space. And that's where most of the kind of relationship colour is in our life. It's the people you don't know that well, the people you just go down the pub with and have a laugh, the people you see on your course who maybe they're not best mates yet, but you do have a laugh with them and there's a bit of banter and a bit of chat. Maybe a lot of you guys in this season, you have moved away from home, you've left school, you've come to a new space. Maybe you don't have those really core friendships in your area yet. And it's tough because it's really hard to build those when you can't hang out with people so much. And there have been seasons where we can do more, but there have also been seasons, and there will be seasons, where you're more limited. So what we need to do is 3 things. We need to think about who we can connect with, and really just be a bit wider instead of just narrowing down or just thinking, actually, I'm kind of, this is just too hard. I'm just going to keep in touch with that with like my family and like my best mate, and the rest of it, I don't know, maybe when this is all over I'll try and talk to some other people. Now this is too long a season for that. So think about who, think about how. I know everybody kind of hates doing Zoom, and you've been stuck on it all day, some of you doing lectures or whatever. I'm on Zoom almost all the time right now, so the idea when I've finally got some downtime of going back on Zoom again, no, it doesn't fill me with joy either. But we do need to be creative about how. And if you can't stand doing this, you don't like the look of your own face on the screen or whatever, don't forget the old-fashioned phone, or write notes, or send messages, or play chess online together, or whatever it is that you can do. It's sometimes so helpful to have a hook to hang what you do on. So when you're thinking how, don't just think like the practical how, like phone or internet. Think how, like what are we going to do? So instead of like getting on Zoom and then you're like, well, I've basically done nothing because it's lockdown. How about you? And your mate's like, yeah, I've basically done nothing. And you're thinking, yeah, this isn't going to be the most exciting conversation. Okay, so think of something else. Do a quiz, or do a wine tasting, or read a book together and then discuss it, or watch the same Netflix thing and then chat about that. Whatever it is, like live bake if you've got a kitchen you can do and your mate's got a kitchen. Anything. Find a hook to hang it on. So think about the how. And then think about when. And the message with when is really just try and plan it. Try and be intentional, because if not, you won't do it. So if you can get a regular slot, are there a bunch of mates who you can have like a regular Friday catch up with, or a regular Monday morning coffee with before lectures start? Or even through Christmas, if there's people you're not going to see because you're heading off back home next week or in the next couple of weeks, like how are you going to stay in contact? Okay, my third P before I hand back to Esther is productivity. So as human beings, another thing that we just really need is we need to feel like we're having an impact on the world. Remember that thing about if you feel out of control, it makes things worse. So one way that we can trigger this hope circuit and kind of trick our minds into feeling better is anything that makes you feel like you are getting somewhere, you are making a difference to something, you have improved something, you have brought order out of disorder. So in those moments where life is tough and we're struggling and we can't concentrate and it just starts to feel like, oh, I'm just starting to drown in all of this, what can you do that can use that to make things feel a bit better? So yesterday, just a bit of a rubbish day off, and I'm like, oh man, it was super foggy here. You're like, I can't go out, can't go on the bike. What am I going to do? I tidied quite a few cupboards. No, it wasn't the most rock and roll day of my life, but it did actually make me feel a lot better. Not because I am that sad, that's what I would usually choose to do with my days off, but because it triggered my hope circuit. So can you do stuff that help things to feel more ordered? Tidy your room if it's a hideous mess. Make your bed. Can you turn something you're doing anyway into an achievement? You know, tick it off on a list, or just note in your head that you've done it. Rhythm and routine, remember that stuff really helps too. And I guess where I want to end is that message, because you're like, seriously, it's global pandemic, Kate. How is tidying a cupboard going to change anything? And the thing is, it's not going to change the big picture. But what we're learning to do in this moment is the little things that get us through, that hold you, that keep you going through a tough season. We're learning how to hold hope. We're learning how to do things better. And in a culture that's so striving, that can leave so many people feeling like, I'm not superhuman. You know, maybe everybody else is, but I feel like I'm just failing. Where despair can be such an issue, because we're all quite black and white anyway, quite perfectionistic. And we just think, I am not super winning at life in pandemic season. What we need to do instead is recognize it's not about being brilliant. It is just about getting through. And it's about doing that, not just for ourselves, but for other people too. So with that productivity thing, we have to be careful of that. This isn't about like being the person who writes a sonnet or goes viral or fundraises like millions and millions of pounds. It could be much, much smaller. You know, my son was on isolation recently, and I chatted to him about this, because I thought, like, how he's only 8 and he can't leave the house for 14 days. It's kind of weird. And I'm like, what can we do to try and help him to get through this? So I talked to him about, maybe do you want to read a book, or should we do a puzzle, or is there like a new Lego thing that we can build, something that he could achieve? And he thought for a bit, and after a while he came back and he said, you know what, Mum, I've got it. I know what I'm going to do. So I'm like, great, what is it? He says, I'm going to have 14 consecutive pajama days. And I'm like, it's not really the sort of thing that I was thinking of. But then I realised it's brilliant because he's not putting loads of pressure on himself. He's taken something that could feel like a failure because, frankly, he's got no need to get dressed because he can't go out. He's turning it into something that feels productive, it's measurable, and he's having fun. So he's done it. He's triggered his hope circuit, but also he's been creative. He's learned something new. So let's think about how we can do that in this season for ourselves, for our friends, for people who aren't watching this, you can share this stuff with. How can you hold something that's good in this season? How can you make the little decisions that maybe don't change the bigger picture, but they do just bring a little bit of something good, a little bit of life, a little bit of hope? But let me just finish with a bigger hope, because ultimately what Paul's writing about when he talks about a hope that won't disappoint is the reality that this is not the end. You know, this story, this moment can feel overwhelming, but our job is to sustain through it because there is something better that's coming. And so I just want to speak that over you guys right now. You know, you turn on the news, it sounds so depressing. Remember, bad news spreads faster than good news. And difficult stories are the ones that you will hear because they grab your attention, they trigger your emotions. They're the ones your brain will obsess over in the small hours or when you're on your own or feeling miserable or vulnerable. But there is a better story that's playing out here too. And let me just say to you, this season is not the end of your story. There is better stuff ahead. So do what you can to get through, but remember, ultimately, you're going to have years and years ahead of you that are going to be different to this one. One day you will look back on it and remember it instead of being enduring it right now. Thanks, Esther. I'm going to hand back to you.
Thank you, Kate. That was so good. That was really great. Thank you so much for speaking. And because of that, we've got loads of questions, which is really great.
Excellent.
So, but unfortunately, maybe due to time constraints, we won't answer all of them, but I'm sure for those whose questions don't get answered, we'll find a way of answering them for you and probably posting them on our social media so that you can see. So yeah, I guess we'll just head straight into the Q&A bit. So our first question, also just to mention, if you want to go onto Slido and see what the questions are, you can like which questions you would like to be answered so I can see what everyone would prefer is answered. So our first question is, as a Christian, how would you recommend dealing with harsh emotions like jealousy or anger?
Okay, cool. So whatever your faith background, I would say actually the message is the same, but perhaps particularly as Christians, we are prone to feeling guilty for them. So the most difficult emotions that you have are the ones that are awkward or that you wish you didn't have. And particularly negative ones because they feel nasty, but particularly those sort of social emotions like jealousy, they're really awkward because you just don't want to feel them. You know, like somebody else is having a better time than you, or they've done better than you on an exam. You really want to be a good enough person that you can be pleased for them, but sometimes you just feel like I actually hate them just a little bit, and that's really difficult. And the first step really is recognizing that suppressing emotions just doesn't work. In the moment where they're like, yay, I got an A, and you're like, no, I didn't, then suppress it. That's good. But in the long run, if you want to deal with that emotion, what you need to do is let it have headspace. So what we need is those processing spaces that I talked about, on whether it's on your own, whether it's with mates, or even sometimes if it's a big, difficult emotion, that professional therapeutic space where we can bounce those thoughts around a bit. And it's almost like letting your brain know, like, yeah, I know, thank you for the emotion. I have thought about why I feel this. I've done the underlying processing. Because usually what it means is your brain's trying to raise a bigger question. So, you know, like your friend did better than you on an exam and you feel something really negative, you're not pleased with. Your brain's usually asking you, there'll be something underlying like, am I just rubbish? Or, you know, did I work hard enough? There's an underlying big question that your mind wants you to recognize and find the answer to. And it may be about something that you're going to do differently in the future, something that's significant enough that your brain is trying to make sure that you pay attention to that. So if you just ignore it, it won't go away. Find a space, find a way to process it, figure out what's underneath it, and then the emotion will start to go away.
Thank you, Kate. Moving on straight on to the next one, because a few people have liked it, is how do you help someone else who is going through despair?
Okay, so I think the first thing we can do that is so helpful is talk about this stuff. And I mean, talk about it not just in a way that is like we wait till someone's having a total crisis and then we talk about it. When we talk about mental health right now in our culture, we're very illness focused. So we're all like, oh, we must talk about it. It's okay not to be okay. But generally what that is like, I've got an illness and I'm going to talk about that. But actually there's a whole space before you get to illness, which is a better space to intervene before someone's become really unwell and had a real mental health crisis. Just saying, you know what, this is a tough season. Mental and emotional well-being is like a line, and life pushes you up and down it. And this is, I mean, as a psychologist, it's kind of a little bit fascinating in a slightly morbid way, but because it's pushed everybody universally into a space where mental and emotional well-being just becomes harder. And for me, this is so weird because I'm teaching stuff all the time right now that I'm having to put into place myself too, and I'm having to put it into place with my kids and in my household, and we're all having to tread water a bit right now. And so the first thing we can do to help other people who are struggling with despair is let's be honest, let's talk about it. So I'm encouraging people to have conversations at the moment if they're out on their walk with their one person or whatever it is, you know, or if you're on Zoom, of just saying like, what are you finding difficult right now? Or like, here's something I just found really tough today. What about you? Because when we create a space where we can be open, before it's become a real crisis, what we can do is then bring these things out. And also we can share top tips, ideas, practical stuff, and we can help each other through. And that's where some of the practical stuff that I've shared with you can be really helpful. And I guess it's understanding what we're trying to do. You know, so much of our minds, we want to be able to solve everything. And in this season, we can't. So sometimes then we feel stuck. It's like, I can't make global pandemic go away, so I'm helpless. But you're not. There's things you can do to keep yourself going, to keep your friends going, to keep your loved ones going in this season. So it's good to remember that stuff too.
Great, thank you. It's so important now as well, isn't it? This next question kind of links into that, quite personal one. Someone's asked, I definitely felt overwhelmed at some points, but for a lot of this term, I felt just low. How do I deal with that persistent lowness?
Oh, yeah, that is such a good question. I love that question. And I know in some of the conversations that I've had just in my family around this, I remember my daughter's 15 and her saying like she's never had a season where she just felt like miserable for so long. And it's true, like this really sucks. It's like, and you do have moments where it just hits you and you just think, oh man, this is just a bit rough. It is tough. And I think what we've got to do then is that thing about pursuing joy, like mercilessly chasing it down. Because the most difficult thing when you feel low is your motivation goes. You just think, oh, I just going to stay in bed. I can't be bothered. I just sometimes I have moments where I just want to lie on the floor for a bit and just like hope it all goes away. And the most difficult thing to do then is to make yourself do something that will actually lift mood a bit. It will make you feel better. So like the last thing in the world you feel like doing is tidying up a cupboard or tidying your room or going out for a walk or phoning a mate. But sometimes we have to force ourselves to do those things because they will actually make us feel better. And we have to be creative. Maybe the things you used to enjoy doing are things you can't do now. You know, like if you were into team sports or you loved drama or acting, or there are some things now, even just like going down the pub and hanging out with mates or going clubbing, there's stuff that we can't do right now. So you might have to learn some new things. And you know, it's interesting, like I'm a massive introvert, so I find it really hard connecting with people like remotely. And in the first lockdown I basically just didn't. I was having a massive hissy fit about the whole thing. I just thought, if I can't see my best mates one-to-one, I'm just not going to talk to them at all. It's fine. When all this is over, we'll get back together. And then somewhere around like the 6th month mark, you're like, maybe that's not going to work, because I actually really miss these people and they miss me. And so in this lockdown, like one of the things I've done is I reluctantly agreed to do a daily phone call with my best mates, which is really hard. And some days I just don't feel like it. I'm done with the day, but I'm like, oh man, I've still got to do that call. But it always cheers me up. So I think sometimes we have to override our instincts in those moments and be like, actually, I am going to do this because it's good. And having a ritual, having a pre-agreed plan, so that even when you don't feel like doing it, you do it anyway. It helps.
Thank you. So it's 1:45 now, so I think we'll squeeze in one more question.
Okay.
And we'll go with this one. What can we learn from Jesus's example of finding hope and fighting despair? It's quite a different one.
Oh, good. Well, that's like another hour, so we'll squeeze it in. What can we learn? I think what we can let's go for 3 things. So number one is that Jesus did have negative emotions. So let's be really clear. This is a guy who was God in the brain and body that he designed, but without sin. So he lives with the challenges of being human, the limitations of being human, like he needed to sleep and eat and all of that stuff. And he also had negative emotions. So we don't need to feel guilty just for having them. That's the first thing. The second thing we can look at is how did he deal with them? So he didn't suppress them. He did express them. He did deal with them. And he did things like when he heard that John the Baptist had died, he tries to withdraw to get some space to process it. He talked to people about how he felt. He cries when Lazarus dies. And that's a story where ultimately he's going to raise the guy from the dead. So you think he would just have been like, right, everybody stop crying and like, I'm just going to deal with it. But no, he pauses and he doesn't just cry, he really sobs. And so there must be something that's really important as human beings, as people in connection with other people, about letting ourselves express our emotions. And then number 3 is he didn't do it alone. Like in the most difficult, there were times when he retreated to be on his own with God, and that's important. But on the whole, in the most difficult seasons in his life, he took people with him. So, and there's that beautiful balance in the Garden of Gethsemane where he's taken his mates with him, but he has moments where he's like, I'm just going to go over there. But they're still with him. And I think we can really learn from that we do need other people, and it's okay to. Sometimes our world says you should be like totally self-sufficient, but that's actually not the story of the way that Jesus lived. If you want to get the best out of your human brain, it seems like you need to do that in connection with some really great mates, and I think that's a third good lesson we can learn from him.
Thank you, Kate. That was such a good answer. And that was a really good question as well. So we'll end the Q&A section there. So if you didn't have your questions answered, I'm sure Kate will be happy to answer them at another point, and we can post them on our social media.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so that's it really. Thank you so much, Kate. It's been really great. And I found the talk really powerful and encouraging. So I hope that everyone that has watched today was able to take something away from it. You spoke so well, so thank you so much.
It's been brilliant to be with you. And can I just flag one more website, which is beheadstrong.uk, which is a site about emotional mental wellbeing. It's designed for teenagers and young people, but it does have an ask a question space. So if you have questions that you want answered and you've not, you can click on there. But there's also loads of stories and stuff. There's fun stuff to get you through on a rough day. And there's also a whole bunch of stuff on managing isolation and lockdown as well. So it's a good space to go check out. beheadstrong.uk.
Yeah, we'll link that in our social media so that people can find it. That's really great. Thank you. So before we end, I'm just going to shout out an event that the Christian Union has tomorrow, and that is our live carols at home. This is going to be 7 till 8 in the evening tomorrow, and it'd just be great to see you guys there. All the information is linked on our social media, on our Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. So yeah, have a look there for that tomorrow. And just one last thank you to Kate. It's been great, and we look forward to hearing from you at some other point in time, because it'd be great to have you back.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's it. Thank you everyone for coming and listening, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. So nice.
Take care.
Nice.
Awesome.
I didn't know how